and with boss. And I really was asked to talk about how to deal with difficult bosses. That was the original question. So what I'm going to be asking and sharing with you are some things in dealing with difficult bosses, and how to self-advocate, what to do and what not to do, and those kinds of things. My first question is, does everybody have the handout that was sent to you? Hopefully you have that, because I am going to, okay, good thumbs up.
Yeah, you guys give a thumbs up if you guys got it. If not, the link is in the chat where you can follow along.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask you to do some writing. We're not going to get in groups as we normally would, but I'd like you to just think this through a little bit. I was a boss, just in terms of background, I was a boss, okay? Now I'm in business for myself, and I'm the company. I'm the whole company. I'm the worst boss I ever had. But I had bosses who reported to me. I was, my background, some of you have been on the classes before. I worked in county government for about 21 years. Was also on the faculty of Santa Ana College for about 25 years on the adjunct faculty. Taught on Monday and Tuesday nights for almost 25 years, human relations and management classes. And so I've been in that system a little bit, and actually was selected to become the dean of their business division. But I did not accept the position because I did not like who I'd be reporting to. And that's my first tip. And that is, shop around for bosses if you get a shot, okay? Because sometimes I think they're 90% of the battle. And if you go to the second page of the handout, you're gonna see a quote I got from a book that I recommend strongly. It's called Good Boss, Bad Boss by a guy named Robert Sutton. And it says, bosses matter. They pack a wallop with the single biggest influence of whether we choose joy or despair at work. In fact, most of the studies they've done on bosses is that, well, excuse me, not on bosses, but people leaving an organization, it's usually up in the 55 to 60 percentile range in large organizations anyway, that people don't leave the organization, they leave their boss, okay? So sometimes what's that old cliche, 9/10 of the battle is who you work for. And being a boss, I've stuck my foot in my mouth, I've irritated people, I've sometimes behaved in a way that they didn't like. Doesn't mean my behavior was poor, it's just that the style didn't fit with their style. So I've been on the receiving end of employees coming into my office and suggesting to me how my behavior might be more in tune with what they would like to see when they show up on Monday mornings. And sometimes I can change that behavior, but sometimes it's not going to change. So, and that's fine, because bosses and being a difficult boss sometimes is in the eye of the beholder. So I'm going to share from experience as well as some things I know, and we'll see what happens, okay? And if you have a question, want to unmute, go to chat. I have a quote from Claudia. Where can I get the handouts? They are, I think they're uploaded, aren't they, on the line?
Yeah, the link is on the chat as well, Claudia. If you click on the link, it should be able to pull it up for you. Let me know if you have trouble.
Okay, I'll try to go through it as clearly as I can here. But anyway, on page 3 of the handout, I have just sort of an outline of the topics, really. I wouldn't call it a curriculum guide, because there can be different ways of looking at this. But who are the difficult, how many ever had to work for a jerk? Great. Go ahead, give me a thumbs up. Maybe that's too strong a word. We don't want to call people jerks. How many ever worked for somebody whose behavior fit the description of a jerk? Maybe that's a more diplomatic way. How many ever works for someone you really like working for? Okay. I don't know how we can do this, but you can unmute. That would really help. What if I was going to say good boss, bad boss, and words popped into your head? Words that described a good boss or words that described a bad boss. What would some of those words be? Just
Respect.
Go ahead. Pardon me?
Respect.
Respect. The respectful.
A good communicator.
A good communicator. Any other words pop into your head?
Compassion.
Compassion.
Compassionate for your job. Yeah.
Okay. Good. Any other words? On the bad boss side, maybe the opposite of what you did. I have on the, I see a good teacher, okay, a good listener, that kind of thing. Would it boil down to how they treated you?
A bad boss, yes. The bad boss treated you disrespectfully and, you know, just and change rules every week and all kind of crazy stuff goes on with
Okay.
a bad
Yeah.
boss.
You don't know, or they have a different mood each day when they walk into the office, right?
Unclear expectations.
Okay, unclear expectations. And it's, you know, that makes it difficult, doesn't it? And then sometimes it's their personality, and sometimes there's things that are way out beyond our control. But what I'd like to do is have you, as we get through this, talk about who the difficult bosses are and what makes them difficult. I have a little page where you can do a little exercise on that. And I'm going to start off with self-advocacy, what not to do. And I'm going to talk at you for a few minutes on what not to do, to stay away from. Even if you don't approach the boss, even if you don't want to deal with the situation, there's some things I think it's very important. And that's come out of my 25 years working in government as a boss. And I'd just like to share some things with you that would be helpful. And you don't have to agree with them. It's just from experience. Categories of difficulty is number 3. Me, I said, when I see that, I see the boss through my own lens. And so it's how I view the boss. And I can label them as difficult, but somebody sitting next to me might really like that behavior. So what happens is we see it through our lens, and we have to make sure that if we're seeing the boss as being difficult, it's not something that lies within the boss. Sometimes it might lie within us. It can be a combination of the boss and me too, butting heads or having differences of opinion. Or, you know, it's not always negative either. It's approaching them and having a conversation. And sometimes you'll find bosses more receptive and less receptive. But conflict is always about you and I. If you ever take my conflict class, it's about you and I. So you have a conflict with your boss. It's not just the boss, it's both of us. And then the boss. Sometimes it is the boss. I must tell you, in my county career, I worked for the County of Orange. There were 3 occasions. One occasion where I just quit. I walked into the boss and said, I'm not working here anymore. He asked me why, and I said, it's you. And we got into a little discussion. But he had called me names and done some things, and so I decided to leave. I was rehired a week later. Somebody got a hold of me. And then there are 2 other times where I transferred for a boss. My son is this is being recorded, so I hope I don't get him fired. But he's a fire engineer paramedic for a large county, the largest county in the country in relation to size, not population, and that's San Bernardino. And every year he can put in for a new station. And of course, San Bernardino is so large, it goes all the way out to the Nevada border. A lot of times you put in for stations that are closer to your home where you don't have such a drive. But what he puts in for, that's part of it. But he also puts in for who's the captain, who's the boss I'm going to be reporting to, because I got to go live 24 hours a shift with him, and who is that boss? So they matter. They pack a wallop. I'm going to give you some tips for advocacy, and I'd like you to share self-advocacy, what to do. And then I'm going to give you a model for communicating with the difficult boss. You do have in your library of videos, one that I did initially, a 90-minute one on communication skills. And there's a lot of things in that video that I think will help in this situation. So I'm not going to cover a lot of that because I don't want to repeat myself, but you can go back to that video. And then the number 6 is knowing when to give up, toughen up, and wise up. Pick battles big enough to matter and small enough to win. But as you see the quote at the bottom of the page, never waste a good opportunity to learn from a bad boss. There's always a learning experience involved in that, and so that's what it's about. So, having said that, page 4. I have some questions here, and I don't know, I'm going to give you some time to do this, but what makes the boss difficult to work with? And I've listed some things, from attitude to work style to all kinds of things. I'd like you to go through that, and if there's some there, you can just circle. If not, you can add some, what makes them difficult. But I would like you to, it may not be your current boss either. I don't want to get anybody in trouble either. But I'd like you to share with me when you're done, what are some of those? It'll give me a better idea in my comments. What issues or situations are the most difficult to bring up with your boss? That's number 2. What would your number 3, what would the relationship look like if it was a good relationship? Envision what that looks like. And how do you typically respond when you're working with a difficult boss? What's worked, what hasn't? And then self-advocacy. What are some things you believe you can do to advocate for yourself? We may not have time to cover all these questions. They're covered as we go along, but it's sort of a guide I put together, not for this class. When I had to sit down and work with bosses, deal with bosses, coach bosses who reported to me. I still coach executives and that kind of thing. I go through lists like this. So I'd like you to take, it's 12:14. I'd like you to just take maybe 3 or 4 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and go through this and just scribble through some things that will help you get focused for the workshop. Okay? And I'll shut up and let you do that. And again, you can go to the the chat and click on the link. It should come up. How are we doing? A lot of questions, huh? I see one here that's come in already. Bad boss, big ego, takes too much, talks too much regarding private issues. They bring their life into the workplace. It's a fun exercise, isn't it? I hope you're not too depressed. Give me another minute just to think through as many questions as I give you time for.
Or if you guys are done, can we get a thumbs up just to kind of see who else is working on it?
Okay. Thumbs up mean they're done working? Is that what that means?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes, just to get an idea.
This is a good old thing about Zoom. You know, when we're in a classroom, we can see everything and that kind of thing. But and then we'd probably be doing this for half a day. But we would. How many have had to adapt because of the pandemic? I got to tell you, can I name drop? I'm not getting into politics, but who you vote for. But last night, Jill Biden, that would be his wife, right? Yeah, okay. She spoke, and my wife saw she was speaking. And she spoke from Brandywine High School on Falk Road in Wilmington, Delaware. And that's where my wife went to high school. So we were, and it's at Brandywine High, and my wife was a middle school and high school teacher, but Jill Biden taught at Brandywine High School, not her. They were about the same age. So, but anyway, I had to name drop. Okay. I lived in Delaware for 3 years. And so anyway, that was sort of neat. So what are some issues? I had, again, big ego. They're in their own bubble, I can see.
It's, yeah, bad boss not dealing with issues and just let it fester.
Okay. Okay. I have an assessment that measures, I use that sometimes measures why bosses do that, but sometimes they don't see it as their role. But any others? You want to unmute and share? It's a chance to.
Only want to hear themselves talk.
Okay.
One I didn't see is favoritism, kind of.
Okay. Double standards? Typically,
Yes.
yeah.
Or nepotism even.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. I had the brother-in-law of the head of my agency working for me. The county administrative officer for the county of Orange, that was the county for a while. His daughter reported to me. That was fun. I'll tell you a little story about what that county administrative officer did, because he called me up. I didn't know him. And I was a first line supervisor. And he said, I understand my daughter's going to be working for you. And I went, oh, geez, here it goes. And he said, she's got to stand on her own 2 feet. I'm staying out of it. And if she doesn't do her job well, you do what you need to do just like you would anybody else. And you'll never hear from me ever about my daughter working for you, because I could imagine what kind of shoes you're in now, being nervous with the boss's daughter working for you. And I don't want you to feel that way. What do you think? It's the kind of boss you want to work for, don't you think? The Hall of Administration is named after him now. Anyway, I remember that. And his daughter was a wonderful worker, though. And he didn't even get involved in the competition. She had to get the job on her own. And it wasn't known until after she was hired that she was his daughter. Any others?
Poor communicator, tests patient staff.
Okay. All right. How many had work style issues? Micromanages, doesn't encourage employees to work independently. Poor communicator. Test staff, sort of put you on trial.
We had one person mention that, and not a team player.
Not a team player. Okay. Wanted to get some ideas. Now, question number 3, we're not going to discuss in here, but it says, envision the relationship you would like with your boss. What would the relationship look like? And basically what that is if you're dealing with a poor communicator, they want you maybe to be open with them, to tell you what's going on. If they let problems fester, they would like the problems to be addressed sooner before it impacts your work. There's all kinds of ways you can address those questions. But if you're going to go in and sit down with anybody, it doesn't have to be a boss. It could be even a personal relationship. I think it's important to have some kind of idea of how you would like that relationship to be and what your commitment will be to it and what kind of commitment you need from somebody else. Now, when you're dealing with a boss, because of the authority relationships and the different power relationships, sometimes that's very difficult to do. But I always, when I had my wits about me, okay, what do I want to walk out of this meeting with? What are my objectives? What does this boss need to know? What does this person need to know? And how can I help them, as well as how can they help me? Because sometimes it might be my work style that created some of the abrasion in the relationship. And for example, I like a lot of autonomy. I like to, if you're my boss and you give me an assignment, I like to create the structure and pursue goals and objectives as I see fit. I really don't want a lot of structure laid on me. Well, in the real world, sometimes you can't behave that way to be successful. But I would push back against that a little bit. And so bosses sometimes saw me as being rebellious, not a team player. Well, I like structure and I'm a team player. It's just I like to be on the team differently than sometimes that team needs. And so sometimes I have to look at my own behavior, okay? And there's a lot of people who like structure given to them. Tell me what to do, A, B, C, D. I'm the kind of person, tell me what to do and let me figure out the A, B, C, D. However, sometimes I need to be told that A, B, C, D because it doesn't always work that way. Can you see that sort of difference? And what happens is I have to look at my own behavior a little bit. Why am I going in there? When it gets to be abusive, a bully, somebody who just likes to get under your skin, play games with you, then it goes into matters that might even be HR related because they've stepped over the line. And we'll get to that a little bit too, okay? I had on questions 4 and 5, what's worked and what hasn't worked. Anybody have any ideas on that one, briefly? What's worked when you've approached somebody that you can share?
It completely depends on the person. I've had bosses be really responsive and apologetic and not realize, and I've had bosses get defensive and angry.
Yeah. Which bring is it? I don't have. Is that Rachel?
It is.
What that brings me to a thing too is you have to make a decision whether it's worth walking through the door, don't you? Because you'll have bosses be cooperative and some that just don't want to cooperate, or they get defensive themselves in the moment. But yeah, I've had that same. I had a boss call me an SOB one time, only used the words. So he didn't like what I was telling him.
So
Okay.
another comment for us, clear and healthy boundaries.
Uh-huh. In fact, I think I have a comment later on about setting boundaries. That's a good point. Clear and healthy boundaries. And would that be, make sure I understand when I can approach you, when can I talk to you, what can I say, those kinds of things. And everybody knows who's on first. How many of you ever had a boss that said, my door is always open? Yeah. And then you walked in and you look like you just invaded them, you know, even though they said my door is always open. So sometimes bosses might say things, but in their style, they don't really mean it. So what I lecture bosses about is don't say it. By the way, if a boss says my door is always open, for me, that means it's a door for them to walk out and see what's going on to help you. So not for you to walk in, but.
So we have another, the boss approach you for info instead of having to tell the boss.
And that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. If you're working for a micromanager, you might want to put that in reverse. Don't wait for the micromanager to tell you what to do. Do it, and then go and tell them you got it done. See how that reverses? Sometimes, I'm not saying it works with everybody. I generalize up here, okay? So don't sue me, okay? But what happens is when I work for micromanagers, because I like structure, I don't like structure imposed, it drove me nuts. You know, get out the bottle of Jack Daniels. Here I go, all right? So what I used to do is try to nip them in the bud and get the stuff done before they're going to come out and ask me to do it, if the expectations were clear. And sometimes that worked. Then I might have a boss who would say, well, how come you didn't tell me you were going to do that? And I usually would say, well, that's what I'm doing right now. So again, you got to know the personalities and that kind of thing, okay? I remember yelling at a boss. His name was Bob, and it was a hallway conversation. He said something. By the way, I'm an introvert and very quiet person. I'm coming across maybe a little too harsh here. But he said something that just, I went overload, and just, I don't even remember what I said to him, but it was like, you ever see a mom in a mall and she gets so mad at her kid that she just starts yelling right there in front of the world, kind of thing? And I used to think, what are you yelling at that young kid like that for in the mall? And then when we had kids, I said, oh, now I know why you're yelling at that young kid in the mall, that kind of thing. And I went back to my office and he didn't say a thing. And what happened later was I went back to apologize to him. And he was one of the best bosses I ever had because he said, well, you were upset. He said, so I'm not going to talk to you when you're upset. I want you to come back in here calm and then we'll solve the problem. So he sort of coached me through that. And so he was a really good boss because he didn't slap me around for being human when sometimes that happens. But so let me move you along. Okay. I'd like you to go to page 5.
Oh, sorry, Forrest, one quick thing, one more chat. Insecure and thinks everything is about the boss instead of the students or
Okay.
the customers.
Yeah. And it's insecurity. That could also be, I'm not a psychologist, but we've been talking about it lately. Some sort of narcissistic, is that a word? Who they like to get under your skin. And when you approach them with the truth, they lash back. And sometimes that's a sign of insecurity. Or sometimes they just don't know how. Let me suggest something to you. And if you want to take this to the, what's the head of your college? The chancellor, the president? What do they call the head of the college? Who's the top? What's the title?
It's the president.
President. So everything I say today, take to that person, but never mind. No. I think organizations tend to be overmanaged and underled. And I don't think you manage people. What you manage are your relationships with people. And when you get into self-advocacy, it's about managing relationships. It's trying to manage the other person. When you get into any kind of an interaction, even in a marriage, it's about managing the relationships. And sometimes we have organizations who don't value that and they don't understand that. They might promote somebody who has the educational background, but I know some people that don't even have a high school diploma that are the best, some of the best leaders I've ever seen because they know how to manage relationships and understand that importance. So sometimes when somebody's insecure and thinks everything is about the boss, I sometimes think that they also think that managing people is their role and not managing the relationship. Now that's a leadership side, okay? Most of my work's in leadership, but leadership happens at all levels. In fact, most leadership happens at the entry level of an organization. That's where most of the relationships occur. That's where most of the people are. And what happens is that I decide each day how much effort I'm going to put into the job. So if I know the rules, I can comply. But if I know you and you know me and we work together, then we can commit. Because compliance is one thing, but commitment is what you're after. And so I think when you try to manage relationships, and I'm going on and on maybe too much here, I think that's really where your head needs to be. And I do think there's a lot of bosses that get promoted because they're very good technically, but they don't have an understanding of what their role is in building commitment and a cadre of relationships that make people want to show up on Monday mornings. And that can be done, okay? It can be done. On the next page, page 5, you're gonna, if I'm correctly, you just have sort of numbers there, 1 through 10. Okay, and the reason I did that because I change this all the time. But let me, if you have a pen or pencil and it works for you, 10 things not to do. Okay, and I'm going to make these brief. This one is don't assume the boss knows everything, or that they should know everything. Just don't assume they know everything. Sometimes you can be their teacher, especially when it comes to relationships, understanding the job, and those kinds of things. One of the biggest mistakes we make when we promote somebody from like manager to executive or supervisor to manager primary, we assume they know the job that they're going into, and they don't. They don't. As soon as you promote, you render yourself partially incompetent, and you need to get competent. So don't assume the boss knows everything. Number 2, and I don't know if this is a word in a sentence, but don't generalize your boss. Does that make sense? Don't generalize your boss. And what I mean by that, make sure you're dealing with a bad boss. Don't make a blanket statement. That's really what I'm saying. There are many reasons why employees don't like their boss. And I may not like my boss for a reason, but the person next to me may like my boss for that very same reason. So don't generalize the boss and throw them into a stereotypical bucket. And I don't think you're going to be effective in dealing with it. You want to focus in on the issue that's important to you. 3, don't try to fix the boss. Don't try to fix him. They are who they are. And I guess that brings me to number 4, stay away from personality. Stay away from personality. Focus on behavior. An oak is an oak and a pine is a pine. How many have kids? You have 2 kids? Are they different? Guess what? That's a hand you're dealt. Okay? And I realize every morning when they wake up, they're like wet cement because however they land, that's how they form that morning. But what happens is that's the hand you're dealt. Okay?
Someone put something in the chat for us. Most of the time, the admins tend to train the boss.
Most of the time, the admin trains the boss. What's the admin?
Like the administrative assistant.
Oh, okay. That's a good coach. Yeah. And that's okay. And sometimes what happens, if the boss is willing to learn, I'm not a very organized person. And there was a secretary that reported to me named Margaret. And she would come into my office. She'd only been there maybe a week or 2. Well, I come in one day and my desk is all organized. Okay? Everything's organized and stuff in files. And so I said, Margaret, who did this? She said, I did. And I said, why? Because I'm tired of wasting my time looking for stuff. So she came into me, and that's how she dealt with me, because I was frustrating her with this filing system that was not Phi Beta Kappa. I teach a time management class, and I feel like a hypocrite when I do it. But train up, sure, that's fine. Sometimes it's going to happen. The other thing, too, when you promote into areas maybe you don't have the same technical background. And so you're going to have to rely on other people. Employees who say, well, he doesn't know everything I know. I say, well, good for him. Good for her. Okay. Their job now. If you want a difference between a supervisor and a worker, it's production. Serve, get the stuff done. A supervisor, a boss, it's production capability, helping people becoming capable of producing. And that helping people become capable of producing is where sometimes the training needs to be. It's a different game. I don't know where I was at on this, but stay away from personality. Don't blame yourself. These are things not to do. Don't blame yourself. If you're good at your job, don't focus on you. I mentioned my autonomy. I used to think something was wrong with me. No, there's nothing wrong with me. If I do my job well, I get it done. So don't blame yourself. Sometimes we can be our own worst enemy. This next one is very important. Take the high road. Don't badmouth the boss to others. I mean, if you want to go home and kick the dog, but don't kick dogs either. That's bad. But don't badmouth the boss. That's going to come back and haunt you because it affects your reputation more than theirs. And if it's really a bad boss, I mean, an abusive boss, a micromanaging boss, everybody knows that anyway. Okay, but don't badmouth the boss. Take the high road. It'll save you a lot of heartache. The next one, whatever number it is, don't promote an adversarial relationship. And the way you do that is give up your need to be right. It's not about you being right and them being wrong. That creates an adversarial relationship. It's about collaborating to get what you need and give them what they need. The next one's very difficult, but don't let it, the boss, affect your work. Although I know it will. The reason why you want to stay on good terms with others in the organization, not just the boss. And if your work goes down, sometimes it impacts their work. So try to not let it affect your work. Although, let me tell you something about bosses. I just got asked last week to prepare a proposal to work with an executive team. And they have a lot of issues, morale issues, because of leadership. And they have a higher sick leave rate because of poor leadership. So it affects work. They have a higher stress claim than is average. because of poor leadership. It affects work. So a poor boss is going to affect your job, but try not to let it affect you as much as you can, because it hurts others in the organization. Number 9 or 8 or 7, where I'm at, don't go over your boss's head if you can avoid it. Where I've seen it backfire is when you're trying to subvert the authority of your boss. If you worked for me, you could go talk to anybody in the chain of command you wanted, especially if you couldn't talk to your immediate boss and get some insight, but you didn't do it to subvert authority if you can avoid it. Okay? I want to make that one other thing clear about that. But don't let really abusive behavior go unreported. You're going to pay a price, but if you let it go unreported, I mean really abusive behavior, it's not doing anybody any favors. But again, if your HR department has got their act together, you're going to be protected from the standpoint of knowing who showed up and that kind of thing. And the last one I already mentioned in passing, don't practice being right. Make the other person wrong.
In other words, Forrest, someone mentioned make peace, not war.
Yeah. Yeah. Although there might be a little battle in between. And again, I don't know who your bosses are. If I knew who they were and you're talking to them, you know, we could get into specifics. I'm generalizing here. But it's your career, it's your job, and your reputation. And guess what? When I used to sit around in staff meetings with the department head, with bosses, we talked about employees, okay? And so people will talk about you. And but it's not about you being right, it's about doing the right thing. And I think the right thing is to try to promote in self-advocacy the best relationship you can cut with whoever you're dealing with. And if they don't want to play along, well, at least you gave it your best shot. But in the communication class I did earlier, people will work with you when they're psychologically safe. And that's why empathy is so crucial in the world. And so you want to make it a psychologically safe climate. I'll tell you what, I had employees that walked into my office to complain, whatever it was. And I just rolled my eyes. Oh, here they are again. Okay. Oh gosh, you know, what sky is falling this morning? All right. And no solutions, no vision, no direction, no work, just wanted to complain. And I'd let them rant for a little bit. But when they came in with a real issue, sometimes I'd confuse it with some of that ranting they did before and miss the point. But you can agree to, I had some chat here from Michelle, you can agree to disagree. And if you have a great boss now.
So she's sociologically safe.
Psychologically safe. I tell you what, I had a boss for 6 years. I got offered 2 promotions during that 6-year period from 2 different other managers. I didn't take them. Why? Because I like coming to work, okay? Because of that boss. And not one sick day. I was there all the time. He was a great boss. He gave me the autonomy I needed, but he also reeled me in when I needed to. He was honest with me. He dinged me a couple of times in a performance appraisal for things I needed to improve on, but he did it with my dignity intact. And so when I deal with him or any boss, it's about dignity, and you want to walk out of the room with that intact. And so I'm glad you have a psychologically safe boss, if you do. Okay? How am I doing? Shall I shut up? We're halfway through this thing. Managing relationship. Now I mentioned I don't know who your bosses are. So I don't know what the issues are necessarily, but when you approach a boss, I listed, there's what, 12 or 13 things on the page there. And it may not be your current boss, but maybe some bosses you had to deal with. It says circle, which category does your boss fit in? Because I think it's going to influence the way you handle the situation. And answer the question, is approaching them worth it? So I have categories, and there could be 1,000, but go ahead and read those and circle the number that might relate best with who you're dealing with or have dealt with. And then sign your name to it, and we'll send it to your boss. No, we won't do that. Give you about a minute to do that. And then so far, I've got 5, 7, and 12.
Forrest, read off the choices, please.
I'm sorry?
Forrest, read off the choices.
I can't.
I believe she's saying to please read off the choices.
Oh, okay. Approachable and willing to work with you. That's a good one, right? Not approachable and closed-minded, unwilling to listen. Does not like the confrontation and will avoid it. I think that has to do with that confidence comment we had earlier. Overmanages and underleads. That's a micromanager. If a micromanager is somebody that's always looking over your shoulder, telling you what to do. You have to ask permission to whatever. Not a skilled communicator. They don't listen very well. And I worked for a boss that wasn't a skilled communicator, but he still gave it his best shot. But they don't give a damn. They could care less. They lack compassion and empathy. They're self-centered. And this one's just a certified jerk and has no clue. They don't see themselves the way others see them. A bully, abusive. And there's different kinds of bullies, but bully is a word too now that HR is having to define, but abusive. In over their head with the job. In over their head with their job. Let me tell you real quickly, a guy named Steve was promoted to an executive position. His position went vacant, and I was selected to take that position. He was in his executive position for about, I don't recall exactly how long, but he realized he was in over his head. And he went back and told the department head, I'm in over my head. I don't know what their discussions were. And people felt that the promotion maybe was not a good one anyway because of that. But he went in and said, I'm in over my head, or words to that effect, which means he had the rights, because everybody's still on probation, to bump me out of the position I was promoted into and bump me back down to the class I came from. He refused to do that. He said, find me another position at that same level somewhere else in the county, because I'm not going to bump Forrest out. I worked for him before I got his position. I worked for him for about 4 years. I died and went to heaven when it came to a boss. But he was a boss that when he got to a point where he didn't understand what he was doing, he would raise his hand and ask. And the respect he gained from taking that demotion and knowing he was in over his head was incredible from staff and people around him. A really open boss. So whenever I see in over their head, I think of the positive side of that. But sometimes we promote and we get in over our head, okay? Stressed, they're stressed out by the job, the situation. They're human too, like you and I are. They may be working for a bully themselves. Their values are out of sync with the organizations. They don't understand public service. And last, I just have other categories you can think of. Does that help?
So we have a couple comments in the chat for us. Someone, Johnny's sad that his boss is leaving for another position. And then Rachel mentioned 5, 7, and 12 for her.
Okay, got that.
And then I had someone else, Claudia, who said that she's experienced 1 through 13.
Well, Claudia, come over to this side of the computer and start teaching this class. You got 1 through 13.
I might be your sidekick in a little bit.
Okay. Well, I've had abusive and not a skilled communicator. I've had most of these in some ways. And I guess maybe sometimes, hopefully I haven't done it too much, but you want a little metaphor? How many have ever gone to a restaurant, you bought a meal, and it had too much salt on it? Okay, and what do you say to yourself when it has too much salt on it? You can unmute and tell me. What do you say to yourself?
The kitchen oversalted my food.
Yeah, I usually say it's got too much salt on it. I'm not looking for any deep psychological, okay? How many ever gone to a restaurant and you bought a meal and it didn't have enough salt on it or enough seasoning on it? It was bland. It was just bland, too bland. What do you say to yourself? Pass the salt? Maybe it's too bland, right?
I ordered poorly.
Okay. What do you say when the meal's perfectly salted? Yeah, you don't say anything. You know why? You don't notice it. Okay? If it's got too much salt, you notice it. If it doesn't have enough, you notice it. But when it's perfectly salted, you don't notice it. That's a good boss, the one that's perfectly salted. Oh, sometimes they need to sprinkle a little salt on you, but then sometimes they need to back off. But the bosses or the teachers are the people that have been around you who are perfectly salted. They've helped you, they've coached you, they've directed you, they've helped you grow, and you didn't know it. It happened. And then later on, you reflect back and say, boy, they really did help me. Has that ever happened in your life? Because sometimes we don't notice it, even when they're there helping us do our thing. And so I'm always looking for that perfectly salted boss, the one that can tell me when I need to get it right, and the one that backs off and just allows me to be forced. It's sort of like a simultaneous loose type property. Good organizations have simultaneous loose type properties. They have type properties, things you have to adhere to, rules, procedures, protocol, chain of command. But they're also loose in allowing people to be who they are, to grow, to seek goals and objectives as they see fit. And I think that's true in a marriage. Okay, and so what happens is that we need simultaneous loose type bosses, and a lot of times we don't notice them. I wasn't going to share that with you today, but who never knows what comes out of my mouth, okay? So let's go to the next page. Tips for self-advocacy, what to do. Hope you don't mind me reading at you here a little bit, but I tried to list these I've got from various places. It's not all original to me. I copied a lot of this stuff, by the way. Copying from one book is plagiarism. Copying from 2 books is research. So you've got research here. Are you dealing, number 1, are you dealing with a difficult boss? Make sure. But what are your boss's motivations? I mean, what are your motivations, but also what are the boss's? Why are they behaving the way they are? What needs do they have? Why are they who they are and why they are? I'm not talking about psycho fluff here, but maybe it's a style. Maybe it's how they like to be. How many have a boss sometimes that you see indecisive? Does it ever happen? They may just be high data. They like a lot of data. They like a lot of information. That's their motivation. Just shovel it in, shovel it in. They want to take the risk out of the decision making. Then you might have a boss that's low data. They sort of trust their intuition and experience and make pretty quick decisions. You could say they shoot from the hip, low data. The high data boss is anal. Well, those are judgmental terms. One's low data, one's high data. What are their motivations in terms of style? get to know that. And I went into a meeting with the county administrative officer. I didn't know him. He was a new one, with a woman who worked for me named Betty. And she wrote a parenting manual for a program called GoFar. She just rainy. So I come in with this report, and I don't even remember what the subject was. And the CAO, he saw it, and he thumbed through it. She came in with 1 page with 8 bullet points, just eight 1-sentence bullet points, we call them, and handed in that sheet of paper. He looked at it, he said, I like number 2, I like number 7, and I like number 8. Let's do that. I come in with this thick report. She knew that he was low data. She knew the boss's motivations. She was able to work with him much more effectively than I was, because I was a trained bureaucrat coming in with a bunch of crud. My boss would want the big, he wasn't my immediate boss, the CAO. We were selling a program in the county. My immediate boss liked the thick report. So that's what I prepared, this thick report. But this boss didn't. And so again, know their motivations. Talk to your boss about it. Whatever it may be, this is the first step, talk to your boss. You have to, you can't win if you don't play. So how do you, self-advocacy, you got to go talk to the boss. You got to tell them. That's why I mentioned earlier, have a vision, have an idea of where you want to go, what you need, and how you're going to help them do that. I mentioned adversarial, number 3, work with your boss and not against them. That's why it's so important to know their motivations. What does he or she care about? What are their goals? So if they're a poor communicator, you might have to draw that out of them. That may be a frustration for you. Is it just style? Okay. A style to me is the behavioral music you like to turn on. And I'm a low task decision maker. If you put something in my in basket, I'll get to it when I get to it. I don't put a sense of urgency on it. My wife, you put something in her in basket, the paper doesn't even land before she brings it out and she makes a decision. Okay. Things to do list, A, B, C, D every day. Okay. Even in this pandemic where things have slowed down and she's retired, she's got her A, B, C, D, E. And what happens is she's very task focused. So when she asked me, did you get to that yet? I said, well, I'll get to it. She said, get to it. Because that's what she wants to do. Okay. I've been married 49 years, so it's worked. Okay.
So we have a couple things in the chat for us. I have 1, 3, and 11 from Johnny. Rachel's inquiring where you took your research from, what books.
Okay.
And Michelle mentioned planning ahead and staying ahead.
Yeah. That's be ahead of the curve. Well, I'll tell you what, in terms of books, I have this one. It's called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. I don't know if you can see that, by it says Travis Bradbury and John Graves. This is a good communication book when you're going in. It's really a good book too, and it's not psycho fluff. Emotional intelligence is a concept created by Daniel Goleman. He took some stuff and it bestseller training programs and things. I got this at the airport and was reading it on an airplane, and I've kept it with me. It really emotional intelligence is like an IQ. You have A, B, C, D, E, but emotional intelligence is how to keep your emotions in check and give up your need to be right and things like that. So on the communication part of it, if I was going to recommend one book, this would be it. Good Boss, Bad Boss by Robert Sutton. It talks about how to deal with good bosses and bad bosses. It's funny. There's some cuss words in it. It's earthy, okay? And it's one of the best leadership books I've ever read. So I went back to that.
Sorry, Morris, is that a Sutton, S-U-T-T-O-N?
S-U-T-T-O-N. He's a Stanford professor, but it's not academic stuff. And then I wrote there's a book called Dear Boss. Dear Boss. I thought I brought it in. That's the title of it. That may be out of print, but it's a good book. And then here's what you can do. And some of this stuff you'll see here where I got it from, because I had to package this stuff. So how do I package it? And I just went to the internet and looked up difficult bosses, how to deal with difficult bosses. And you're going to see a ton of stuff. And I knew I had 90 minutes. I had stuff from my leadership classes on how not to be a jerk boss. That's when I had the bosses in the room, right? And I took a lot of stuff out of that I've just prepared over the years through experience and that kind of thing. But the book is called Dear Boss. And I don't have the author in front of me. So those are some of the bosses. If you want a bibliography of books that deal with not just this subject, but a lot of subjects, I have one that I've accumulated over the years, books I've read and used. I have a company called Public Sector Excellence. And if you put those 3 words together, publicsectorexcellence@gmail.com, and you email me and say, send the bibliography, I'll send it to you.
Just dropped it in the chat for them, Forrest.
Okay, publicsectorexcellence@gmail.com. I'd be happy to do that. And I won't put you on my mailing list. Sometimes, okay, if you want me to put you on my mailing list, go ahead and do that. I advertise classes, but I won't do it unless you ask. But, the other book that it's called, this is one, in fact, it's the first book on my bibliography. It's called Creating a Future of Your Choice, a Do-It-Yourself Guide to Empowerment. It doesn't so much have to deal with difficult bosses, but it's setting goals and communicating those goals and trying to create a vision and the support you need to get there. It's by a guy named John Perry. I've worn out this book. You read the prologue and the epilogue and you'll have tears in your eyes, but in between, you get some good solid stuff on setting goals. I have on, going back to page, forgot what page I was on, 7, right? Tips for self-advocacy. And you came up with this too, stay one step ahead of them, planning ahead. Well, I'm gonna go back up to number 3 here too, but what frightens them? I tell you what, I've had bosses, they felt scared because they were in over their head. I mentioned Steve, but they, what are they worried about? I sometimes, when I gave somebody an assignment, I worried a little bit, but what frightens them? And then I have too, how much importance do they place on impressing others? That's the most difficult boss for me to work with. That just wants to impress others. I don't think we're in the impressions business. And how do they measure success and how do they measure failure? If you make a mistake and you don't get it right, are you a failure and do they treat you that way? Or if you make a mistake and you don't get it right, they see you as someone to coach and move ahead and those kinds of things. Sometimes it's their attitude. If you have a boss that expects you to be perfect, it's going to get in the way of you being excellent. Perfectionism doesn't exist. And so I've had a boss one time where every little microchip, it seemed like, was questioned as to whether or not it was good, bad, or in between. And I got afraid of, when I first went to the County of Orange, I had a boss that everything that I wrote had to go through him. Not such a bad idea, but he would revise it so much that by the time an item got to the Board of Supervisors or whatever, I lost ownership. It had been changed so much. Now, some of the things he taught me were good in terms of writing, but it took away my confidence because everything was red, you know, do this, do this, do this, do this, even when it didn't need to be. But he was so worried about using words to impress others. And my concern was expressing to others. And so we clashed. And for example, when I said after we talked in a memo, he changed it to pursuant to our conversation. You see, because it's more what? Impressive. And I just put in a memo one time, after we talked yesterday, or the date, that's how I wrote it. He's now got it pursuant to our conversation. Okay. So again, we had to talk about it. He sent me to a writing class 3 times. And the guy that I had took a writing class, he was the guy that suggested I change pursuant to after we talked. So I'm venting now with you, but stay one step ahead of them. Number 4, especially the micromanager. I mentioned that earlier. And Michelle also mentioned planning and staying ahead. Try to beat them to their own game, and sometimes they start getting confidence and building confidence in you. Set boundaries. That was said earlier. Boundaries. What I mean by this is if you're working for a boss that's negative, the tone, just any negative person, try to spend as little time with them as possible. Okay, and that's what I mean by setting boundaries. Sometimes you can't tell them what the boundaries are, but if you can avoid viewing them, seeing them in the morning because they're going to say, "What are you doing here?" Then try to avoid. Try to do that as best you can. Act as a leader, and that's managing the relationship, not the boss. I mentioned that earlier. You provide leadership in the organization by how you behave. The next one, whatever number it is, be prepared to discuss criticism of yourself, because sometimes when you sit down with a boss, they're going to have some critical comments about you in return. Okay, hopefully they'll be presented in an enlightened and dignified way, but sometimes you're going to get, you should have done this, you're always that way, you're this and never, you're never this. You're going to get criticism, so be ready for that. That's where emotional intelligence, that book, will help you immensely. Help you immensely. I mean, I cannot recommend that book, for me anyway. There's just so much good stuff in there. Maybe we could do a 90-minute on emotional intelligence. I mean, write that down. I'm looking for work. Remain professional when you're confronting your boss. The ego is no amigo. And if you go in there and it's all about your ego, then you are the problem. I know it's hard to do, but that's why that giving up your need to be right is so important. Remain professional. I mentioned take the high road. And never let your boss's behavior be an excuse for your own. If that's the way they are, that's the way I'm going to do it. Don't do that, because then you lower the bar for yourself. And if they're unkind, don't descend and feel like you have to be unkind in return. That boss that called me an SOB, I didn't call him. I'm not perfect, but I didn't call him an SOB back. Okay, I told him what I thought about him using that kind of language in our meeting, and that I didn't think it was going to help us solve our problem. That's what I told him. Okay? But I never said, don't you talk to me that way. Because as soon as I say that, then he's got me. I just said, those kind of words aren't going to work with me. That's basically what I said. And I was in the military and been through all this crud with officers. There's 2 kinds of officers you work for in the military. The ones you had to salute and the ones you wanted to salute. And the ones you had to salute, you learned how to keep your mouth shut and say the right thing. But you also want to say, if you want your dignity intact, you have to return. You get what you give. And sometimes I haven't done it. I'm not perfect, but me and that guy called me an SOB. We sort of had a love-hate relationship after that. Sort of worked to both of our favors. The next to last one, take the HR route if you have to, if you feel you must, if it's got to you to the point where you feel you need to go to human resources and let them know what's going on. And that typically when you have a harassing, abusive boss, sometimes that's not a style issue, but I'll tell you this quick story. Her name was Cindy. She comes to my office and she says, I have this guy working, she was a civil engineer, and he doesn't want to take direction from me. And I might've been in HR at the time, but I'd spent 12 years in HR. And she says, could you talk to him? And I said, well, I can't tell him what to do. You can do it. No, I just want you to talk to him. And he's a nice guy. He's a good guy, but he won't take direction from me. And it's because either of his culture or his religion. So he came into my office and I said, she set it all up. And I said, you're not taking direction. And he said, this is where it's a difficult employee, but you can turn it around. He said, well, yes, I don't take direction from women. Okay. And I said, any reason why that you can share with me? And I don't remember exactly, but it had to do with some cultural, maybe I'm using cultural in the wrong way. Some belief he had based on where he was from. He was not from this country. And he was from a Middle Eastern country, but I don't remember where. And I said, well, okay, now, what I said is, well, you shouldn't behave that way, or you shouldn't do that. I said, okay, I can understand why you behave that way. And then I said, in our organizational culture, we put women in positions of supervision and management, and employees are required and are expected to take direction from them. So I said, that's the situation you find yourself in. Okay. And there's three things you can do. You can take direction. You can try to transfer and find another boss who's a male in the engineering field, but it may happen to you again, or you can quit. Options with consequences. So he found a transfer. Okay, and everybody was happy. But I love the way the boss handled it. She didn't tell him he was wrong, bad, dumb, or stupid. She wanted to cut a deal that was in the best interest of everybody. Sometimes you may not have those options, but when you're sitting down with your boss, you have to think about their best interests as well as your own. Is that going overboard?
Forrest, I have a question. What if the bosses encourage the bad behavior of your colleagues?
By
A bullying situation, for example?
bullying situation?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when it gets to a bullying, where they encourage the bad behavior, and you're on the receiving end of the whole thing, it depends on how approachable that boss is. But I think you might have an issue where you need to get some help from somebody who knows who that boss is, because if they're doing that, they probably had complaints before, and that's where HR or somebody needs to either give you advice. I had a guy come into me, his supervisor, they were having a problem, and the supervisor reported to me, he's in the chain of command, and she could be pretty harsh. Not a bully though, but I just said, how would you like me to be involved? Or you want to sit down and talk about how you might approach her to resolve the situation? So I would get some advice from people who know that individual.
It's not now. It happened like way before, but to the point where it was like I would cry before I'd go to work.
Yeah.
Until I realized, okay, what do I do? Do I continue to cry, or do I gain more knowledge in what I'm doing to make myself more marketable?
Yeah.
So I went for plan B.
Yeah.
And it worked, because now I'm here. Thankfully.
Yeah. I think in our real world, I could sit up here and be, pour syrup on things and say these things work. But sometimes we have to that's why vision is so important. I mentioned earlier, how do you envision a relationship? It's crucial. If you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere else. If you do know where you're going, you still may end up somewhere else, but you're going to be closer to where you wanted to be. And so having a vision of somebody, like you mentioned, somebody mentioned earlier that you got a really awesome boss that's leaving. I mean, that's sad, isn't it? You got this awesome boss. But what is awesome and what makes it awesome? And I know I'm not going to mention his name, but I know an awesome boss at Santa Monica College. He's one of the finest leaders, supervisors, and managers I've ever been associated with. And I know him from another organization. And I'm not going to embarrass him by letting his name. Approachable, isn't afraid to handle the tough situations, and absolutely stone cold awesome. And I always told him, because I was sort of a coaching guy for him. And I said, boy, I'd love to work for you. And because he was coachable. He wasn't, how many have a boss who's a know-it-all? They're not coachable, okay? So I think you're, Carla, I think what you're doing is smart, and you find another place to go grow in. Because you know what a flower out of place is? It's a weed. And you can grow up feeling like a weed, or you can go someplace where you feel like a flower. Okay? I'm sorry, that's sort of gushy, but document. Is document on there? I hope it is. Document. Carla, you took the high road, okay? And that's what you do. But document, because sometimes he said, she said kind of thing, and avoid future bad bosses. Shop around when you can, okay? When you can. But live with it until you move on. Because those, you know, just on what you said, Carla, there's nothing I want to tell you. Job security is a superstition. Stay psychologically self-employed. In other words, you're hired by the city, and excuse me, the county, the college, and you have some stability in that workplace. But I think your job security is what comes from within. Your work habits, what you know, your skills, your abilities, your knowledge, all of your character, all that stuff. Because if you do find yourself working for a bad boss and you want to start shopping around, what you're going to be selling is not the security you get from Santa Monica College, but your knowledge, your skills, abilities, your character, and those kinds of things. And so stay psychologically self-employed, okay? Because when an organization doesn't need you, guess what they do? And we're experiencing this now in the pandemic, aren't we? And you've experienced it. You've probably had some friends who've experienced it or loved ones. And job security is a superstition. So you have to carry what you can carry yourself and do the best you can. Doesn't mean it's not going to be painful, okay? But when the pandemic hit, all my classes stopped. Everything, zero business. So what do I know how to use now? Zoom. So what it did was create a learning curve. And I'm still learning. And my coach is Isabel. She's Isabel Velasquez. She's there. She's my coach. Okay. Where I go, she goes. Because when I don't know what I'm doing, she's there to coach me. And I guess that's also too, in terms of if you have bad bosses. Robert Sutton says, team up. If you mentioned everybody, we had a boss who was, I don't know if he's abusive, he's hard to work for. And there were 6 of us that reported to him. We teamed up. We became a group that we made sure we got our work done together, that we made sure that we had a relationship with each other, and we learned how to cope with the boss together. We teamed up, okay? Because we weren't going to change him. And he was a very knowledgeable guy, a smart guy, but he would manage by pressure. He was the guy that called me an SOB. And so what happens is we teamed up, and that's what you might want to do there. Not team up to get him, but team up to get the job done. I had some scenarios that we're not going to have time to get to, but the first one is your boss comes in your office and wants done some I'm going to do this in a general way in a minute, and wants something done right away. He rarely sets priorities. He's a poor time manager. You already have a full workload. If you would have came in 2 weeks earlier when you knew about this, you could have planned it into your workload. You're going to approach your boss to clarify priorities and get the direction you need. And he always seems frazzled and stressed, okay? The other situation, your boss is disorganized and often late for meetings. By the way, what I'm going to do typically for that boss is, hey, you want me to start the meeting before you get here? Okay, and jump in. Your boss tries to control everything you do and micromanages you. And finally, you're sitting down with your boss in an arranged meeting to discuss how he responded to an idea you had in his last staff meeting. In front of everyone, he called your idea stupid and said it would never work around here. So how can you approach that boss? All right? I strongly suggest, because we don't have the time here, you can take these and you can role play them. Get somebody that you know. You play the boss, they play you, and role play them. If we were in person and had more time, we can do that. But I had to put this in here because sometimes practicing a little bit of conflict resolution helps. And let me give you some ways to deal with those. And on the next page, it says 5 steps to manage conflict. But all you have is step 1, step 2, step 3, right? Step 1, take responsibility for dealing with the conflict. That's number 1. Take responsibility. You can't win if you don't play. Uncover, define, and discuss the real problem. Discuss the real problem. And I mentioned some on that previous page. Again, stay away from personality. What's the real problem? When you called my idea stupid at the staff meeting, it made me feel as if it was a bad place to present the idea. I really felt embarrassed by that. Is there a better way for me to present these ideas, a better place? And I'd appreciate if you wouldn't call the idea stupid, but you can call it, it's not going to be workable. My feelings were challenged by that. I remember I think something like, I'm going to bring up the behavior. Now, when I just did that, did I say he was wrong, bad, dumb, or stupid? I used I statements, told him how I felt. I want to solve the problem. I don't want to win. I said, you can't play, you can't win if you don't play. I'm not talking about win, lose. I don't want to be called, it's like when the guy called me an SOB. He never called me that again. And so what happens is that uncover the real problem. Ask questions and listen is step 3. Get expectations clarified. Find out what it is they need. Ask questions and listen. You're trying to learn a little bit from them. Number 4 is set goals with the boss when you can and create an action plan. What you need to do, what they need to do to help resolve the situation. If my boss asks me, well, how could I, if you have a dumb idea, what could I say that, and not be phony about it? Well, you could say that idea is not workable for these reasons. You don't have to use the judgmental language. And because I don't like to be called stupid in front of my peers. That's what I told them. Okay. But they all understood because they probably been called stupid too, but I was calling them. Follow up is number 5. Solutions are never perfect. There's always unintended consequences. Things don't always work out exactly, and so follow up, unless it's some real minor thing you got resolved right away. So take responsibility, uncover the problem, ask questions, set goals, and follow up. And that's why I have down at the bottom by this author, Living with Integrity. But you have to call your shots. And some bosses, it may be worth just coping and living with it until, like Carla did, you move on. Because I'm telling you, sometimes when you approach somebody with your feelings, it can backfire. Okay. So what do I have? If you're going to role play this, fundamental skills, self-advocacy and communicating with the boss. Some things you might want to think about when you're taking notes before you walk in, and you may be nervous, but you keep the atmosphere open and professional. I know I'm reading at you here, but it's not about putting them on trial. Explain the problem in a friendly manner. Be assertive. And when you're assertive, what that means is you're sharing the concerns you have for yourself, but you're not ignoring the concerns they have. Collaboration is acknowledging and discussing the concerns of the other person, and it's also acknowledging and discussing the concerns you have. That's collaboration. Aggressive is, I just care about me, I don't care about you. Passive is, I just care about you, and I don't take my own concerns into consideration. And so you want to try to collaborate. Let the person know why it's a problem and why it's important and concerns you. What the behavior was, what effects it had on you, and how you feel about it. Ask for their concerns and ideas. If I was coaching you in a role play, I would say in any of those scenarios I wrote, what are your concerns in this situation? How might you approach the problem? What will be your objectives? Ask for their ideas and offer yours. Again, that's collaboration. To improve work progress, present ideas, quality, reduce stress and strain, build teamwork, whatever it may be, get some thoughts going. Always remembering that there's got to be something in it for the boss as well, if they are approachable. Okay. Discuss each idea, offer your help, and then summarize agreements reached. You might document that. Ask for feedback, do that actively listening part where you make sure you understand. How many use the English language when you're talking with your boss? Actively listen. It's a lousy language for understanding. I've implemented the project, boss. What's that mean? Does that mean I'm doing it or it's over? It can mean both, can it? So again, in acronyms and buzzwords, but actively listen. And I have number 6, end on a positive note when you can. Don't be phony. Okay. Well, I wanted to come in and talk about it. Apparently it's not a good time. See you later. Okay. Well, I wouldn't say it that way, but see you later. If you had a brain cell in your head that died of loneliness. You know. Key principles for communication. These for me with anybody. You want to try to keep the discussion open and non-defensive. You go back to that tape I did on communication way back when, last month. I have some tips on that for there. Check for understanding. That's what empathy is. That's what empathy is. Encourage participation. Ask for ideas and thoughts. I would even say sometimes, am I off base here, or am I going down the wrong road with you, boss? I want to get this resolved, but I'm going to ask and find out. Bridge back to your objectives, especially if it becomes too emotional or the boss tries to steer you away or manipulate you. I'm going to bridge back to, well, the reason why I came in was this is what I want to discuss. Apparently, it's not a good time. I appreciate you discussing it with me. I'm going to bridge back if we go off on tangents and things like that. And there's my give up your need to be right again. Okay? So those key principles are what you weave through a discussion and practice it with somebody. Write out a scenario and have some fun with it. And it doesn't have to be about bosses. It could be about dealing with how many have to deal with irate customers? You know, I'm a taxpayer, pay your salary. I don't know if you ever get that. Do you ever get that? Just tell them they're cheap. No, don't say that. Don't say that.
We deal with parents too. I don't know if all my colleagues here do, but like we have parents, our son's tuition pays your salary.
Yeah. And you don't say you're cheap. There's a concept called fogging. And yes, you do. And how may I help you? Fogging is when you drive right through the fog. It offers you no resistance. Your ego puts up the resistance. I'm a taxpayer, I pay your salary. Well, you're cheap. Okay. I'm a taxpayer, I pay your salary. And how may I help you today? Your ego is what gets in the problem. You're practicing being right up and down everything. If you would have had this done yesterday, we wouldn't have this problem. Well, the reason why I took this long to complete is we had to go X, Y. I'm not talking about being defensive here. I'm just saying, well, we're short staffed. They don't want to hear that. They don't care if you're short staffed. My daughter's a middle school teacher, and she's teaching like we are today. Some of the parents hate it. You know why? Because they can't get rid of their kids for 6 hours. That's why. And so what happens is, in fact, she has a parent that had a bumper sticker, and the bumper stickers, there's no way my son could be a joy to have in your class. So use your sense of humor. And that's the other thing too. Maybe I didn't put it in here, but manage your stress, keep your sense of humor, okay? Because the real jerks you have to work with, they have to start at zero to get their sense of humor back. I have on the next page just a whole long list of things that, if we had time to go through them, but I'd like you to go down where it says don't use absolute. See where it says always, never, should. Try to stay away. You're always that way. You're never this. You should try to stay away from absolutes like that. Take the example. Yes, when you called my idea stupid, I said you're always that way. Bring up that example, and that's what that means. But just some things. If you have a boss that needs to see this, and they'll get mad at you if you show it to them, take it to Kinko's FedEx office and fax it to them, and they can't trace the number back to you.
Everyone's at home. We can't fax it to them.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, when we get the blessed vaccine, okay. Yeah, I'm getting tired of this. The days. How many here sometimes you know what day of the week it is anymore?
It gets lost in translation.
I have a quote that I got from somewhere at the bottom of page 11. Convincing people that they're wrong is difficult. Giving them the means to do what they already are doing a little bit better is easier. So don't expect a complete change. Subtle pressure, relentlessly applied, results in change. If you lean against a hedge long enough, it'll start growing in a different direction. So sometimes you just have to keep leaning in there, and sometimes you get what you need. Subtle pressure, relentlessly applied. Finally, I have on the next page, know when to give up, toughen up, and wise up. this can create stress and strain. And so sometimes you might be fighting Don Quixote fighting windmills. I think you have to know when to give up and just learn to cope with it. Okay, seriously. Because you're going to lose quite often if you have somebody that's locked in the comfort of their opinion to avoid the discomfort of thought. All right? It's not when you have an opinion that's a problem, it's when your opinion has you. And people who aren't coachable, typically, they don't want to face the music, or they don't understand. And so sometimes you just have blood on your forehead. I'm not saying you don't take a shot at it, but know when to give up. That's a judgment call. Know when to toughen up. And that's toughening up is learn how to manage the stress and strain that comes from working in a difficult situation. Have outlets from that. Have a little escape mechanism. Look forward to things you enjoy. Take the 5-minute break or whatever it may be at work. Even when you're working from home, if you can, walk outside the door and get away from it for 10 or 15 minutes and then come back in. Plug some things in your day so that you can learn how to manage the stress and strain. And the last one is wise up. If you fight it negatively, if you fight fire with fire, you'll end up with ashes and you'll create more stress than you need. So, and you put more pain in your life if you fight it. And so I know I do. So learning how to manage the stress and strain might ease that. And that's why I say give up, toughen up, and wise up. So you have to be careful about all that and make sure that you plug that in your days. When should I approach them? Should I approach them? Plug things in your day to get away from it. Stress and strain things. Okay, whatever. Plug positive things in your day. And then make sure you wise up and take care of yourself, but try to help others as opposed to fight with them. And down at the bottom, you see a quote, stay humble and work kindly. I have a back on my desk here behind me, it says, be a better part of someone's day, work kindly. I have a little card I can send you that it's like a business card that has that on there too. If you public sector excellence with me to get the bibliography, give me a mailing address and I can send it to you. I can't, it's like a business card, not a business card, but it's that size that I buy from this company. It's called whatever that company's name is. And I usually give them out in person, but if you give me an address, I'll mail you the little card and a give up your need to be right card. So I'd be happy to do that. And it's 1:31. I went a minute over and I'm union. So it's time to shut up.
Any final thoughts, if anything, for Forrest?
Yeah.
You can mute yourself, or I can unmute you if you raise your hand.
It's okay. Yeah, you spent your lunch hour here, didn't you? Well, thank you for coming, and I will maybe see you down the road.
For finishing, I just want to say thank you so much. You made me work through some of my past anxieties.
Well, thank you, Michelle.
And
That's Michelle, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had a great time today.
Thank you, Michelle.
Okay.
All right. So for anyone staying behind, we're going to end the session in about 30 to 60 seconds. So thank you for joining us as always. It's been a pleasure. And as always, Forrest, thank you. You've been wonderful. We love you.
Thank you. Someday we'll meet in person.
I hope so.
Well, take care. Stay safe.
Thanks, you as well. All right, guys, I'll be ending the session now. Take care.